Book 4 of Plato's Republic. Here Edemantus interposed a question. How would you answer, Socrates, said he, if a person were to say that you are making these people miserable, and that these are the cause of their own unhappiness? The city in fact belongs to them, but they are none the better for it. Whereas other men acquire land, and build large and handsome houses, and have everything handsome about them, offering sacrifices to the god on their own accord, practicing hospitality. Moreover, as you were just saying now, they have gold and silver, and that all the usual among the favorites of fortune. Poor citizens are no better than mercenaries who are quartered in the city and always mounting guard. Yes, I said, and you may add that they are only fed, and not paid in addition to their food, like other men. And therefore they cannot, if they would, take a journey of pleasure. They have no money to spend on a mistress or any other luxurious fancy, which, as the world goes, is thought to be happiness. And many of other accusations of the same nature might be added. But, he said, let us suppose that's to be included in your charge. You mean to ask, I said, what will be our answer? Yes. If we proceed along the old path, my belief, I said, is that we shall find the answer, and that our answer will be that, even as they are, our guardians may likely be the happiest of men. But that our aim in founding the state was not disproportionate happiness of any one class, but the greatest happiness of the whole. We thought that the state which is ordered with a view of the good of the whole should be most likely to find justice, and that the ill-ordered state injustice, and, having found them, we might then decide which of the two is happy. As at present, I take it, we are fashioning the happy state, not piecemeal, or with the view of making a few happy citizens, but as a whole, and by and by, we will proceed to view the opposite kind of state. Suppose that we're painting a statue, and someone came up to us and said, why do you not put the most beautiful colors on the most beautiful parts of the body? The eyes ought to be purple, but you've made them black. To him we may fairly answer, sir, you would not surely have us beautify the eyes to such a degree that they are no longer eyes. Consider rather whether, by giving this and other features their due proportion, we are making the whole beautiful. And, so I say to you, do not compel us to assign guardians a sort of happiness which makes them anything but guardians. For we too can clothe our husbandmen in royal appeal, and set crowns of gold on their heads, and bid them till the ground as much as they like, and no more. Our potters also might be allowed to repose on couches, and feast by the fireside, passing round the wine cup, and while their will is conveniently at hand, and working at pottery only as much as they like. This way we might make every class happy, and then, as you imagine, the whole state would be happy. But do not put this idea in our heads, for, if we listen to you, the husbandman will no longer be a husbandman, the potterer will cease to be a potter, and no one will have the character of any distinct class in the state. Now this is not as much a consequence where the corruption of society, and pretense to be where you are not, is confined by cobblers. But when the guardians of the law and the government are only seemingly and not real guardians, then see how they turn the state upside down, and on the other hand they alone have the power of giving order and happiness to the state. We mean our guardians to be the true saviors and not destroyers of the state, whereas our opponent is thinking of peasants at a festival, who are enjoying the life of revelry, not our citizens who are doing their duty to the state. But, if so, we mean different things, and he's speaking of something which is not a state, and therefore we must consider whether, appointing our guardians, we look to the state for the greatest happiness individually, or whether the principle of happiness does not rather reside in the state as a whole. But if the latter be true, then the guardians and auxiliaries, and all other equally with them, must be compelled or induced to do their own work in their best way, and thus the whole state will grow up to be a noble order, and the several classes will receive a proportion of happiness which nature assigns them. I think you are quite right. I wonder whether you agree with another remark which occurred. What might that be? There seems to be two causes of deterioration of the art. What are they? Wealth, I said, and poverty. How do they act? They proceed. The process is as follows. When a potter becomes rich, will he, think you, any longer take the same pains with his art? Certainly not. He will grow more and more indolent and careless. Very true, and the result will be that he will become a worse potter. Yes, he greatly deteriorates. But on the other hand, if he has no money, and cannot provide for himself with tools or instruments, he will not work equally well as himself, nor will he teach his sons or apprentices to work equally as well. Certainly not. Then, under the influence either of the poverty or of the wealth, workmen in their work are equally liable to degenerate. That is evident. Here, then, is a discovery of new evil, I said, against which the guardians will have to watch, or they will creep into the city unobserved. What evils? Wealth, I said, and poverty. The one with the parent of luxury and indolence, and the other of meanness and viciousness, and both of discontent. That is very true, he replied. Still, I should like to know, Socrates, how our city will be able to go to war, especially against the enemy who is rich and powerful, if deprived of the sinews of war. That would certainly be a difficulty, I replied, in going to war with such an enemy. There's no difficulty when there's two of them. How so? He asked. asked. In the first place, I said, if we have to fight, our side will be trained warriors fighting against an army of rich men. That is true, he said. And do you not suppose, Adeimantus, that a single boxer who is perfect in his art would easily be a match for two stout and well-to-do gentlemen who are not boxers? Hardly, if they came at him at once. What? Not, I said. If you were able to run away and then turn and strike at one who first came up, and then supposing you were to do this several times under the heat of the scorching sun, might he not, being an expert, overturn more than one personage? Certainly, he said. There would be nothing wonderful in that. And yet rich men probably have a greater superiority in their science and practice of boxing than they have of military quality. Likely enough. Then we may assume that our athletes will be able to fight with 2 or 3 times their own number. I agree with you, for I think you are right. And suppose that, before engaging, our citizens send an embassy to one of the 2 cities, telling them what is the truth. Silver and gold we neither have nor are permitted to have, but you may. Do you therefore come and help us in war, and take the spoils of the other city, who, on hearing those words, would choose to fight against lean, wiry dogs instead with the dogs on their side against fat and tender sheep? That is not likely, and yet there might be a danger to the poor state if the wealth of many states were to be gathered into one. But how simple of you to use the term state at all but our own. Why so? You ought to speak of other states in the plural numbers, not of them as a city, but many cities, as they say in the game. For, indeed, any city, however small, is in fact divided into 2. One is the city of the poor, the other of the rich. Those who are at war with one another. And either of them are more smaller divisions, and you would be altogether besides the mark if you treated them as a single state. But if you deal with them as many, and give the wealth or power or persons of one to the others, you always have a great many friends and not many enemies. And your state, while the wise order which is now prescribed continues to prevail in her, will be the greatest of the states. I do not mean to say in reputation or appearance, but indeed in truth. Though she number not more than 1,000 defenders, a single state which is equal you will hardly find, either among the Hellenes or the barbarians, though there are many appear to be as great and many times greater. That is mostly true, he said. And what, I said, will be the best limit for our rulers to fix when they are considering the size of the state and the amount of territory which they are to include, and beyond which they are not to go? What limit would you propose? I would allow the state to increase so far as the consistent with unity. That, I think, is the proper limit. Very good, he said. Here then, I said, is another order which will have been conveyed to our guardians. Let our city be accounted neither large nor small, but one and self-sufficient. And surely, he said, that is not very severe order which we impose upon them. And the other, said I, of which we were speaking of before, is lighter still. I mean the duty of degrading the offspring of the guardians when inferior, and of elevating the rank of the guardians and the offspring of the lower classes when naturally superior. The intention was that, in the case of citizens generally, each individual should be put to use which nature intended for him, for one to work, and then every man would do his own business, and be one and not many, and so the whole city would be one and not many. Yes, he said, that is not so difficult. The regulations which were prescribing, my good Adeimantus, are not, as might be supposed, a number of great principles, but trifles all, if to be taken, as the saying is, of the one great thing. A thing, however, the one would rather call not great, but sufficient for our purpose. What might that be, he asked. Education, I said, and nurture. If our citizens are well educated and grow into sensible men, they will easily say their way all through these, and as well as other matters which I omit, such, for example, as marriage, the possession of women, and the procreation of children, which will all follow the general principle that friends have all things in common, as the proverb says. That will be the best way of settling them. Also, I said, the state, if once started well, moves with accumulating forces like a wheel. For good nature and education implement these good constitutions taking root in the good education improve more and more, and these improvements affect the breed in men and other animals. Very possible, he said. Then to sum up, there is the point in which, above all, the attention of our rulers should be directed, that music and gymnastics be preserved in their original form, and no innovation made. They must do their utmost to maintain them intact. And when one says that mankind must regard the newest song in which singers have, they will be afraid that he may be praising, not new songs, but a new kind of song, and this ought to not be praised, or conceived to be the meaning of the poet. For any musical invocation is full of danger to the whole state, and ought to be prohibited. So Damon tells me, and I can quite believe him. He says that when modes of music change, the fundamental laws of the state always change with them. Yes, said Adeimantus. You may also add my suffrage to Damon's and your own. Then, I said, our guardians must lay the foundations of their fortress in music. Yes, he said. The lawlessness which you speak too easily steals in. Yes, I replied, in the form of amusement, and at first sight it appears harmless. Why, yes, he said. And there's no harm were it not that little by little the spirits of license, finding a home, and perpetually penetrating into manners and customs, whence, issuing with great force, invades contacts between man and man, and from contacts goes to laws and constitution, and utter recklessness, ending at last, Socrates, by the overthrow of all rights, private as well public. Is this true? I said. That is my belief, I replied. Then, as I was saying, our youth shall be trained from the first in the stricter system, for if amusement becomes lawless, and the youth become lawless, and never can grow up into well-conducted and virtuous citizens. Very true, he said. And when they have made a good beginning in play, and by the help of music had gained a habit of good order, then this habit of order, in a manner how unlike the lawless plays of the others, will accompany them in our actions, and be a principle of growth to them, and if their fallen places in the state will raise them up again. Very true, he said. Thus educated, they will invent for themselves any lesser rules which the predecessors have altogether neglect. What do you mean? I mean such things as these. When the young are to be silent before their elders, how are they to show respect for them by standing and making them sit? What honor is due to the parents? What garments or shoes are to be worn? The modes of dressing the hair, deportment, and manners in general? You would agree with me? Yes. But there is, I think, small wisdom in legislating about such matters. I doubt if it was ever done, nor are any precise written enactments about them likely to be lasting. Impossible. It would seem, Adeimantus, that the direction in which education starts a man will determine his future life, and always attract like, to be sure, until some one rare or grand result is reached which may be good, and may the reverse be good, that is not to be denied. And for this reason, I said, I shall not attempt to legislate further about them. Naturally enough, he replied. Well, and about the business of the agora, and of ordinary dealings between man and man, or again, the agreement with artisans, about insult and injury, or the commencement of actions, and the appointment of juries. What would you say? There may also arise questions of the impositions or extraction of market and harbor dues which may be required, and in general about the regulations of market, police, harbors, and the like. But, oh heavens, shall we condescend the legislation of any of these particulars? I think, he said, that there is no need to impose laws about them on good men. What regulations are necessary they will find out soon enough for themselves. Yes, I said, my friend, if God is only preserved from the laws in which we have given them, and without divine help, said Adeimantus, they will go on forever making and amending the laws, and their lives will hopes of attaining perfection. You would compare them, I said, to those invalids who, having no self-restraint, will not leave off their habits of intemperance. Exactly. Yes, I said, and what a delightful life they lead. They are always doctoring, increasing, and complicating their disorders, and always fancying that they will be cured by the nostrum with anyone advises them to try. Such cases are very common, he said, with invalids of the sort. Yes, I replied, and charming things that they deem him their worst enemy who will tell them the truth. Which is simply that, unless they give up eating and drinking or wenching and idling, neither drug nor culture, nor spell, nor amulet, nor other remedy will avail. Charming, he replied. I see nothing charming in going into a passion with a man who tells you what is right. These gentlemen, I said, do not seem to be in your good grace, assuredly not. Nor would you praise the behavior of the states, which act like the men who I was now just describing, for they are not ill-ordered states in which citizens are forbidden under the path of pain of death to alter the constitution. And yet he who most sweetly courts those who will live under the regime, and indulges them and fawns upon them, in skillful anticipation in gratifying their humors, to be held to a great and good statesman. Do not these states resemble the persons who I was describing? Yes, he said, the states are as bad as the men, and I am very far from praising them. But do you not admire, I said, the coolness and dexterity of the ready ministries of the political corrupt? Yes, he said, I do, but not all of them, for there are some who applaud the multitude as deluded into belief they are really statesmen, and they are not to be admired. What do you mean? I said, you should have more feeling for them. When a man cannot measure, and he has great others who cannot measure declare that he is 4 cubits high, how can you not believe what they say? Nay, he said, certainly not in that case. Well, then, do not be angry with them, for they are not as good as the play. Trying their hand in paltry reforms such as I was describing, they are always fancying by the legislation that will make an end of the frauds in contract, and other rascalities which I was mentioning, not knowing that they're really coming off the heads of the Hydra. Yes, he said, that is just what they are doing. I could see, I said, that the legislator will not trouble himself with the class of enactments, whether concerning laws or the Constitution, either in the ill-ordered or well-ordered state. For the former they are quite useless, and the latter there will be no difficulty in devising them, and many of them will naturally flow out of our previous regulations. What, then, he said, is still remaining to us the work of legislation? Nothing to us, I replied, but to Apollo, the god of Delphi. There remains the ordering of the greatest and noblest and chiefest things of all. What are they, he said? The institution of temples and sacrifices, and the entire service of gods, demigods, and heroes. Also the ordering of the repositories of the dead, and the rites of which to be observed by him, who would propitiate the inhabitants of the world below. They are matters in which we cannot excel, and founders of the city should be unwise in trusting them to any interpreter but to our ancestral celestial deity. He is the God who sits in the center, the navel of the earth, and he is the interpreter of religion to all mankind. You are right, and we will do as you propose. But what, amid all this, is just of our stone? Tell me, where? Now that our city has been made habitable, light a candle and search, and get your brother and Polemarchus, and the rest of our friends to help, and let us see where we could discover justice, and where injustice, and when they could differ from one another, and which the man would be happy should he go for his portion, whether seen or unseen by the gods and men. Nonsense, said Glasson. Did you not promise to search yourself, saying that you would not help justice in her need, wouldn't be an impiety? I did not deny that I said so. As you remind me, I will be as good as my word, but you must join. We will, he replied. Well then, I hope to make a discovery in this way. I mean to begin with the assumption that our state, if rightly ordered, is perfect. That is mostly certainly. And being perfect, is therefore wise and valiant and temperate and just. It is likewise clear. And whatever these qualities, we will find the state, and the one which is not found is the residue. Very good. If there is 4 things, and we were searching for one of them, whether it might be, the one sought for might be known for us to the first, and would be no further trouble, or we may know the other 3 first, and the 4th would be clearly the one on the left. Very true, he said. And is now a similar method to be pursued about the virtues, which are also 4 in number. Clearly. First, among the virtues found in the state, wisdom comes into view, and this I detect a certain particularity. What is that? The state which we have been describing is said to be wise as being good in counsel. Very true. And good counsel is clearly a kind of knowledge, for not to be ignored. But by knowledge, do men not counsel as well? Do men counsel as well? Clearly. And this kind of knowledge in the state are many and diverse. Of course. There is knowledge of the carpenter, but he is the sort of knowledge which gives the city of the wise and the good in counsel. Certainly not. That would only give the city a reputation of skill in carpentry. Then a city is not to be called wise because possessing a knowledge which consels for the best about wooden implement. Certainly not. Nor by reason and knowledge which devises about brazen pots, I said, nor possession of any similar knowledge. Not by reason of any of them, he said. Nor yet by reason of knowledge which cultivates the earth, that would give the city in the name of agriculture. Well, yes. Well, I said, and is there any knowledge in our recently founded state, among any of the citizens which advises, no, not about any particular thing in the state, but as a whole, and consider how a state can best deal with itself with other states? There certainly is. And what is this knowledge? And among who is it found, I asked. It is the knowledge of the guardians, he replied. It is found among those who we were just now describing as perfect guardians. And what is the name of the city derived from the possessions of this sort of knowledge? The name of good in counsel and truly wise. And will there not be a city more of these true guardians, or more smiths? The smiths, he replied, will be far more numerous. Will not the guardians be the smallest of all the classes to receive the name of the profession of some kind of knowledge? Much the smallest. And by the reason the smallest part of the class, and by the knowledge which resides in this prescribing and ruling part of itself, the whole state being thus constituted according to nature to be wise, and this, who the knowledge is only worthy to be called wisdom, has been ordained by nature to be of all classes at least most true. Thus, then, I said, the nature and place of the state of one of the 4 virtues has somehow or other been discovered. In my humble opinion, very satisfactorily discovered, he replied. Again, I said, there's no difficulty in seeing the nature of courage, and in what part with the quality resides which gives us the name of courageous to the state. How do you mean? Why, I said, everyone who calls any state courageous or cowardly will be thinking of the part which fight and goes out to war on the state's behalf. Not one, he replied, would ever think of any other. The rest of the citizens may be courageous or cowardly, but their courage or cowardice will not, as I conceive, have an effect of making the city either one or the other. Certainly not. The city will be courageous in virtue, the portions of herself which prescribes under all circumstances that opinion about the nature of things to be feared and not to be fearless, feared, in which our legislature educated them. And this is what you term courage. I should like to hear what you're saying once more, for I do not think I perfectly understand you. I mean that courage is a kind of salvation. Salvation of what? With the opinion respecting things to be feared, what they are and what of nature, in which laws implement through education, and I mean by words under all circumstances, do intimate that in pleasure or in pain, or under the influence of desire or fear, a man preserves and not lose this opinion. Shall I give you an illustration, if you please? You know, I said, the dyers, when they want to dye wool for making the true sea purple, begin by selecting their white color first. This they prepare and dress with much care and pains, in order that the white ground may take up the purple hue in full perfection. The dyeing then proceeds, and whatever is dyed in this manner becomes a fast color, and no washing either with lyes or without them can be taken away from the bloom. But when the ground has not only been duly prepared, you will have noticed how poor the look of either purple or any other color. Yes, he said. I know that they have washed out in ridiculous appearances. Then now, I said, you understand what our object was in selecting our soldiers, and educating them in music and gymnastics. We were contriving influences which would prepare them to take the dye of the laws in perfection, and the color of their opinion about dangers and any other option was indubitably fixed by their nature and training. not to be washed away by potent lies as pleasures, mightier agents far in the washing of the souls than any soda or lyre, or by sorrow, fear, or desire, the mightiest of all the solvents. And this sort of universal saving power of true opinion and conformity with laws about real and false dangers I call and maintain to be courage, unless you disagree. But I agree, he replied, for I suppose that you mean to exclude mere unconstructed courage, such as that of the wild beast or of the slave. This, in your opinion, is not the courage which the law ordains, and ought to have another name. Most certainly. Then I must infer courage to be such as you describe. Why, yes, I said, as you may. And if you add the words of a citizen, you will not be far wrong. Hereafter, if you like, we will carry the examination further, but at the present we are seeking not for courage, but of justice. And the purpose of our inquiry we have said enough. You are right, he replied. Two virtues remain to be discovered in the state. First, temperance, and then the justice which is at the end of our search. Very true. Now, can we find justice without troubling ourselves about temperance? I don't know how this can be accomplished, he said. Nor do I desire that justice should be brought up to a light and temperance lost sight of. And therefore I wish that you would do me the favor of considering temperance first. Certainly, I replied. I should not be justified in refusing your request. Then consider, he said. Yes, I replied, I will, and as far as I can present see, the virtue of temperance has more of the nature of harmony and sympathy than the preceding. How so, he asked. Temperance, I replied, is the ordering or controlling of certain pleasures and desires. This is curiously enough implied in the saying of a man being his own master, and traces of the same notion may be found in the language. No doubt, he said. There is something ridiculous in the expression, master of himself, for the master is also the servant, and the servant the master, and all these modes of speaking of the same person is denoted. Certainly. The meaning is, I believe, that the human soul that is better and more, and also a worse principle, and when the better has the worse under control, then the man is said to be the master of himself, and this is the term of praise. But when, owing to evil education or association, the better principle, which is also smaller, is overwhelmed by the greater mass or worse, in this case he is blamed and is called the slave of himself and unprincipled. Yes, there is a reason in that. And now, I said, look at our newly created state, and there you will find two conditions realized. For the state, as you will acknowledge, may be justly called the master of itself, if the words temperance and self-mastery truly express the rule of the better part over the worse. Yes, he said, I say that what you say is true. Let me further note that the manifold and complex pleasures and desires and pain are generally found in children and women and servants, and in the freemen so-called who are the lowest and most numerous in class. Certainly, he said, whereas the simple and moderate desires which follow reason and under the guidance of mind and true opinion are to be found only in a few, and those to be best born and best educated. Very true. These two, as you may perceive, have a place in our state. The meaner desires of the many are held down by the virtuous desires of wisdom of the few. That I perceive, he said. Then, if there be any city which may be described as the master of its own pleasures and desires, the master of itself, our may claim such a designation. Certainly, he replied. It may be also called temperate, and for the same reason. Yes. And if there are any state in which the rulers and subjects will be agreed as to the question who are to rule, that again will be our state, undoubtedly. And the citizens being thus agreed among themselves, in which class will temperance be found, in the rulers or the subjects? In both, as I should imagine, he replied. Do you observe that we are not far wrong in our guess that temperance was a sort of harmony? Why so? Why, because temperance is unlike courage and wisdom, each of which resides in part only, the only making the state wise and the other valiant. Not so for temperance, which extends to the whole and runs throughout the nodes of the scale, and produces the harmony of weaker and stronger in the middle class, whether you suppose the stronger or weaker in wisdom or power, or numbers or wealth, or anything else. More truly there may be we deem temperance to be agreeable, of the natural superior and inferior, as to the right, the rule of either, both in state and individuals. I certainly agree with you. And so I said, we may consider 3 out of 4 virtues have been discovered in our state. The last of those qualities which make the state virtuous must be justice, if we know what they were. The inference is obvious. The time has arrived, Glossum, when, like huntsmen, we should surround the cover, and look sharp that justice does not steal away, and pass at the side and escape us, for beyond a doubt she is somewhere in this country. Watch therefore, and strive to catch a sight of her, and you will see her first. Let me know. Would that I could! But you should regard me rather as a follower, who has just eyes enough to see what you show him. That is as much as I am good for. Offer a prayer with me and follow. I will, but you must show me the way. Here is no path, I said, and the wood is dark and perplexing. Still we must push on. Let us push on. Here I saw something. Hello, I said. I began to perceive a track, and I believe the quarry will not escape. Good news, he said. Truly, I said, we are stupid fellows. Why so? Why, my good sir, at the beginning of our inquiry, ages ago, there was justice tumbling at our feet, and we never saw her. Nothing could be more ridiculous. Like people who go about looking for what they have in their hands. That was the way with us. We had not looked at what we were seeking, but whether it was far off in the distance, and therefore I suppose we missed her. What do you mean? I mean to say that in reality for a long time we've been taking of justice, and failed to recognize her. I grow impatient at the length of your exordium. Well then, tell me, I said, whether I am right or not. You remember the original principle which we were always laying down at the foundation of the state, that one man should praise one thing only, the thing which nature was best adapted to. Now justice is the principle or a part of it. Yes, we often say that one man should do one thing only. Further, we affirmed that justice was doing one's own business and not being a busybody. We so said again and again, and many others have said the same to us. Yes, we said so. Then to do one's business in a certain way may be assumed to be justice. Can you tell me whence to derive this inference? I can't, but I should like to be told. Because I think that this is the only virtue which remains in the state, which other virtues of temperance and courage and wisdom are abstract, and that this is the ultimate cause and condition for the existence of all of them, and while remaining in them is also their preservative. And if we were saying that the three were discovered by us, justice would be the fourth or remaining one. That follows of necessity. If we ask to determine which of the four qualities by its presence contributes the most to the excellence of the states, whether the agreement of rulers and subjects, or the preservation of soldiers of the opinion which the law ordains about the true nature of dangers, or wisdom, or watchfulness in the rulers, or whether this other which I am mentioning, or which is found in children and women, slaves and freemen, artisans, rulers, subjects, and the quality, I mean, of everyone doing their own work and not being a busybody, would claim the palm, the question is not so easily answered. Certainly, he replied, there would be a difficulty in saying which. Then, the power of each individual in the state to do his own work appears to compete with other political virtues, wisdom, temperance, and courage. Yes, he said, and the virtue which enters in the competition is justice. Yes, exactly. Let us look at the question from another point of view. Are not the rulers in the state whom you would entrust the office of determining suits at law? Certainly. And are the suits decided on any other grounds but that man may neither take what is another's, nor be deprived of what is his own? Yes, that is their principle. What is a just principle? Yes. Then on this view also justice will be admitted to be having and doing what a man's own and belonging to him. Very true. Think, now, and say whether you agree with me or not. Suppose a carpenter is doing the business of a cobbler, or a cobbler of a carpenter, and suppose to exchange their implements of their duties, or the same person to be doing the work of both. Whether the change, do you think any great harm would result in the state? Not so much. But when the cobbler or any other man whom nature is designed to be a traitor, having his heart lifted up by wealth or strength, or numbers of his followers, or any like advantage, attempts to force his way into the class of warriors, or a warrior into the legislator and guardians, for which he is unfitted, and either to take the implements of their duty or another, or which one man is a traitor, legislator, and warrior all in one, then I think you will agree with me in saying that this interchange and this meddling of one with another is the ruin of the state. Most true. Seeing then, I said, that there are three distinct classes, any meddling of one with another, or the change of one into another, is the greatest harm to the state, and may be most justly termed evil-doing. Precisely. And the greatest danger, the greatest degree of evil-doing to one's city would be terminated by your injustice. Certainly. Then this is injustice. And on the other hand, when the traitor, the auxiliary, and the guardian each do their own business, that is justice. It will make the city just. I agree with you. We will not, I said, be over-positive as yet. But if, on trial, this conception of justice be verified in the individual as well as the state, there will be no longer any room for doubt. If it is not verified, we must have a fresh inquiry. First, let us complete the old investigation, which we began, as you remember, under the impression that, if we could previously examine justice on a larger scale, there would be less difficulty in discerning her in the individual. That larger example appeared to be the state, and accordingly we constructed as good as one could, knowing well that in the good state justice would be found. Let the discovery which we have made now be applied to the individual. If they agree, we shall be satisfied, or if there should be differences in the individual, we will come back to the state and have another trial of the theory. The friction of the two rubbed together may possibly strike a light to which justice will shine forth, and the visions which is revealed we fix our souls. That will be a regular course. Let us do what you say. I proceed to ask, when two things, a greater and less, are called the same name, are they alike or unlike in so far as they call the same? Like, he replied. The just man, then, if we regard the idea of justice only, will be like the just state. He will. In the state we thought by us to be just, when the three classes of the state severely did their own business, and thought the temperance and valor to the wise be reason of certain other affections and qualities of the same classes. True, he said. And so of the individual, we may assume that he has the same three principles in his own soul which are to be found in the state, and he may be rightfully described in the same terms, because he is affected by the same manner. Certainly, he said. Once more, then, my friend, we have aligned ourselves an easy question, whether the soul has three principles or not. An easy question? Nay, rather, Socrates. The proverb holds that the hard is the good. Very true, I said, and I don't think that the method which we are employing is at all adequate to an accurate solution of this question. The true method is another and a longer one. Still, we may achieve it at the solution not below the level of the previous inquiry. May we not be satisfied with that, he said. Under the circumstances, I am quite content. I too, I replied, shall be extremely well satisfied. Then faint not in pursuing the speculation, he said. Must we not acknowledge, I said, that in each of us there is the same principles and habits which there are in the state, and from the individual they pass to the state. How else can they come there? Take the quality of passion or spirit. It would be ridiculous to imagine that this quality, when found in the states, is not derived from the individuals who are supposed to possess it. Example, Thracians, Scythians, and the general of the northern nations, and the same may be said of the love of knowledge, which is a special characteristic of our part of the world, or the love of money, which may, with equal truth, be attributed to the Phoenicians and the Egyptians. Exactly so, he said. There is no difficulty in understanding this, none whatsoever. But the question is not quite so easy when proceed to ask whether these principles are three or one, whether, that is to say, we learn that one part of our nature with another, and the third part of desire the satisfaction of our natural appetites, or whether the whole soul comes into play in each sort of action, to determine that it is the difficulty. Yes, he said, there lies the difficulty. Let us now try to determine whether the same or different. How can we? He asked. I replied as follows. The same thing clearly cannot act or be acted upon in the same part of the relation to the same thing at the same time, in contrary ways, and therefore whenever this contradiction occurs, this thing apparently the same, we know that they are really not the same, but different. Good. For example, I said that can the same thing be at rest and in motion at the same time in the same part? Impossible. Still, I said, let us have a more precise statement of terms, lest we shall hereafter fall out of the way. Imagine the case of the man who is standing and also moving his hand and his head, and suppose the person is to say one, and the same person is in motion and at rest at the same motion. To such a mode of speech we should object. We should rather say that one part of him is in motion while the other is at rest. Very true. And suppose the objector to refine still further, and you draw the nice distinction that not only part of the tops, but whole tops, and when they spin around with their pegs fixed on the spot, are at rest and in motion at the same time, and he may say the same of anything which revolves around the same spot. His objection would not be admitted by us, because in such a case are not at rest and in motion in the same parts of themselves. We should rather say that they both an axis and a circumference, and that the axis stands still, for there is no deviation from the perpendicular, and that the circumference goes round. But if, revolving, the axis includes either to the right or left, forward or backwards, then in no point of view can they be at rest. That is the correct mode of describing them, he replied. Then none of the objections will confuse us, or incline us to believe the same thing at the same time. And the same part of relation of the same thing can be acted upon in contrary ways. Certainly not, according to my way of thinking. Yet, I said, that we might not be compelled to examine all such objections, and prove at length that they are untrue. Let us assume their absurdity, and go forward on the understanding that hereafter, if this assumption turns out to be untrue, all the consequences which follow shall be withdrawn. Yes, he said, that will be the best way. Well, I said, would you not allow the ascent and descent, and desire and diversion, attraction and repulsion, are also of them opposites, whether they be regarded as active or passive? For it makes no difference in the fact of their opposition. Yes, he said, there are opposites. Well, I said, and hunger and thirst, and the desires in general, and again willing and wishing. All these you would refer to classes already mentioned. You would say, would you not, that the soul of him who desires is seeking after the object of his desires, or that he is drawing to himself the thing which he wishes to possess. Or again, when a person wants anything to be given to him, his mind, longing for the realization of his desires, intimates his wish to have it by the nod of assent, and he has been asked the question. Very true. And what would you say to unwillingness and dislike and absence of desire? Should not these things be referred to the opposite class of repulsion and rejection? Certainly. Admitting this to be the true of desire generally, let us suppose a particular class of desires, and out of these we will select hunger and thirst, and then they are termed, which are the most obvious of them. Let us take that class, he said. The object of one is food, and the other is drink. Yes, and here comes the point. Is not the thirst of desire which the soul has of drink, and the drink only, not only drink qualified by anything else, for example, warm or cold, or much or a little, or in a word, drink of any particular sort, but if the thirst be accomplished by heat, then the desire is of a cold drink, or if accomplished by cold, then of a warm drink, or if the thirst be excessive, then the drink which is desired to be excessive, or if not great, the quantity of drink will also be small. But thirst pure and simple will desire drink pure and simple, which is the natural satisfaction of thirst, as food is of hunger. Yes, he said, the simple desire, as you say, in every case is a simple object, and the qualified desire the qualified object. But here confusion may arise. I should wish to guard against the opponent starting up and saying that no man desires drink only, but good drink, or food only, but a good food, for good is the universal object of desire. And thirst being a desire will necessarily be thirst after a good drink, and the same is true of every other desire. Yes, he replied, the opponent might have something to say. Nevertheless, I should still maintain that the relatives some have equality attached to them, either terms of relation. Others are simple and have the correlation simple. I do not know what you mean. Well, you know of course that the greater is relative to the less. Certainly, and much greater to the much less. Yes, and sometimes greater to the sometimes less, and the greater that is to be the less that is to be. Certainly, he said. And so, more or less, and in other correlative terms, such as the double and the half, or again, the heavier and the lighter, the swifter and the slower, and of the hot and the cold, and any other relatives, is not that true of all of them? Yes. And does not the same principle hold in sciences? The object of science is knowledge, assuming that this is the true definition. But the object of a particular science is a particular kind of knowledge. I mean, for example, that the science of house building is a science of knowledge which is defined and distinguished from other kinds, and is therefore termed architecture. Certainly. Because it is a particular quality which no other has. Yes, and it has this particular quality, because it has the object of a particular kind, and this is true of other arts and sciences. Yes. Now then, I have made myself clear. You will understand my original meaning in what I said about relatives. My meaning was that if one term of relation is taken alone, another is taken alone. If one term is qualified, another is also qualified. I do not mean to say that relatives may not be desperate, or that the science of health is healthy, or of disease necessarily diseased, or that the science is good and evil, or therefore good and evil, but only that when the term science is no longer used absolutely, but as a quantified object, which becomes the case as the natural health and disease, becomes defined, and hence is called not merely science, but the science of medicine. I quite understand, and I think as you do. But do not say that thirst is one of those essentially relative terms, having clearly a relation. Yes, thirst is relative to drink, and a certain type of thirst is relative to a certain kind of drink. But thirst is taken alone is neither much of nor little, nor good nor bad, nor of any particular kind of drink, but of a drink only. Certainly. Then the soul is a thirsty one, insofar as he is thirsty, desires only drink, for this he yearns and tries to obtain it. That is plain. And if you suppose something which pulls a thirsty soul away from a drink, that must be different from the thirsty principle which draws him like a beast to a drink. For, as we were saying, the same thing cannot at the same time, with the same part of itself, act in contrary ways about the same. Impossible. No more than you can say that the hands of an archer push, or the pull of a bow is at the same time. But when you say as one hand pushes and the other pulls. Exactly, he replied. And might a man be thirsty and yet unwilling to drink? Yes, he said, it certainly happens. And in such a case, what is one to say? Would you not say there is something in the soul biting a man to drink, something else forbidding him, for which other and stronger than the principle which bids him? I should say so. And a forbidding principle is derived from reason, in which bids and attracts proceeding from passion and disease. Clearly. Then we may fairly assume that there are two, and that they are different from one another. The one which man reasons, we may call the rational principle of the soul, the other of which he loves and hungers and thirsts in the feeling fluttering of other desire, may be termed irrational or appetitive, the ally of sundry pleasures and satisfaction. Yes, he said, we may fairly assume them to be different. Then let us finally determine that there are two principles existing in the soul, and what of passion or spirit? Is it a third or akin to one of the preceding? I should be inclined to say akin to desire. Well, I said, there's a story which I remember to have heard, in which I'll put faith. The story is Leotus, son of Agelaon, coming up one day from the Piraeus, under the north wall of the outside, observed some dead bodies lying on the ground at the place of execution. He felt a desire to see them, and also a dread and abhorrence of them. For a time he struggled and covered his eyes, but at length the desire got better of him. Forcing them open, he ran up to the dead bodies, saying, "Look, you wretches, take the fill off the fire sight." "I've heard the story myself," he said. The moral of the tale is that anger at times goes to war with desire, as though they're two distinct things. Yes, that was the meaning, he said. And are there not many cases in which we observe that a man's desires violently prevail over his reason? He reviles himself, and he's angry at the violence within him. In that struggle, which like the struggle of the factions in the state, his spirit is on the side of his reason. But for the passion or spirit element to take part in which desires when reason decides that he should not be opposed, is the sort of thing which I believe you should never observe occurring in yourself, nor, as I should imagine, in anyone else. Certainly not. Suppose that a man thinks he has done a wrong to another, and the nobler he is, the less able is he to feel indigent to any suffering, such as hunger or cold or any other pain which injured person may inflict upon him, and he deems to be just, and, as I say, his anger refuses to be excited by them. True, he said, but when he thinks that is the sufferer wrong, that he boils and chafes, and that the side of what he believes to be justice, and because he suffers hunger or cold or other pain, he is to be more determined to preserve and conquer. His noble spirit will not be quelled until he either slays or is slain, or until he hears the voice of the shepherd, that is, reason, bidding his dog bark no more. The illusion is perfect, he replied. In our state, as we were saying, the auxiliaries were to be dogs, and to hear the voice of the rulers, who are the shepherds. I perceive, I said, that you quite understand me. There is, however, a further point which I wish you to consider. What point? You remember that passion or spirit appeared at first sight to be the kind of desire, but now we should say that quite the contrary, for in conflict the soul spirit is arrayed on the side of rational principle. Most assuredly. But a further question arises. Is passion different from reason also, or only a kind of reason, in which the latter case, instead of three principles in the soul, there will be only two, the rational and conspicuent? Or, rather, as the state was composed of three classes, traitors, auxiliaries, and counselors, so we may not be in the individual soul a third element which is passion or spirit, and was not corrupted by bad education, is the natural auxiliary of reason. Yes, he said, there must be a third. Yes, I replied, if passion, which already has been shown to be different from desire, turns out to be different from reason. But this is easily proved. We may observe even in young children that they are full of spirit almost as soon as they are born, whereas some of them never seem to attain to us the use of reason, and most of them being late enough. Excellent, I said. You may see passion equally in brute animals, which is further proof of the truth of what you're saying. And here we have one more appeal to the words of Homer, which have already been quoted by us. He smote his breast, and then rebuked his soul. For in this verse, Homer has clearly supposed the power which reasons about the better and worse be different from the unreasoning anger which is rebuked by it. Very true, he said. And so, after much tossing, we have reached land, and we are fairly agreed that the same principles which exist in the state exist also in the individual, and that they are exactly three in number. Exactly. Must we not infer that the individual is wise in the same way, and that the virtue of the same quality which makes the state wise? Certainly. Also, the same quality which constitutes courage in the state constitutes courage in the individual, and that both the individual bear the same relation to all virtues, assuredly, and that the individual will be acknowledged by us to be just in the same way in which the state is just. That follows, of course. We cannot but remember the state of we cannot but remember that the justice of the state consists in each of the three classes doing the work of its own classes. We are not very likely to have forgotten, he said. We must recollect the individual in whom the several qualities of his nature do their own work with be just, and he will do his own work. Yes, he said, we must remember that too. And not the rational principle, which is wise, and the other care of the whole soul, to rule, be passionate or spirited principle to be subject of an ally. Certainly. And, as we were saying, the united influence of music and gymnastics will bring them into accord, nerving and sustaining the reason with noble words and lessons, and moderating and soothing and civilizing the wilderness of passion by harmony and rhythm. Quite true, he said. And these two, thus natured and educated, will have the learning truly to know their own functions, will rule over the conspicuous, which is, each of us is the largest part of the soul, and by nature most insatiable of gain. Over this they will keep guard, lest waxing great and strong with the failures of bodily pleasures, as they are termed, the conspicuous soul, no longer confined to his own sphere, should attempt to enslave and rule over those who are not natural-born subjects, and overturn the whole life of man. Very true, he said. Well, together they will not best defenders of the whole soul and the whole body against attack from without, and the one counseling and the others fighting under his leader, courageously executing his commands and counsels. True. And he is to be deemed courageous, whose spirit retains the pleasure and pain the commands of reason about what he ought or not to be fear. Right, he replied. And him we call wise, who has in him the little part which rules, and which proclaims these commands, the part being too supposed to have the knowledge of what is for the interest of each of the three parts of the whole. Assuredly. And what would you not say that he is temperate who has the same elements in friendly harmony, in whom the one ruling principle of reason, and the two subjects one of spirits and desire, equally agreed that reason ought to rule, and do not rebel? Certainly, he said, that is true account of temperance with the state or individual. And surely, I said, we have explained again and again how by virtue of what quality a man will be just. It is very certain. And is justice dimmer in the individual, that he is formed different, or is she the same which we found her to be of the state? There's no difference, in my opinion, he said, because, if any doubt still lingering in our mind, a few commonplace instances will satisfy us of the truth of what I've been saying. What sort of instances do you mean? If the case is put to us, must we not admit that the just state, or the man who is trained in the principles of such a state, will be less likely than the unjust to make away with the deposits of gold or silver? Would anyone deny this? No one, he replied. Will the man or citizen be guilty of sacrilege, or theft, or treachery either to his friends or to his country? Never. Neither will he break faith, what has been oaths or agreements. Impossible. No one will be less likely to commit adultery, or dishonor his father or mother, or to fail his religious duties. No one. And the reason is that each part of him is doing own business, whether in ruling or being ruled. Exactly so. Are you satisfied that in the quality which makes such men in such states is justice, or do you hope to discover some other? Not I, indeed. Then our dream has been realized, and the suspicion which is entertained at the beginning of our work of construction, that some divine power must have conducted us to a primary form of justice, has now been verified. Yes, certainly. And that the division of labor, which requires the carpenter and the shoemaker and the rest of the citizens to be doing their own business, and not another, was a shadow of justice, and for that reason it was of use, clearly. But in reality justice was such as we were describing, being concerned, however, not with the outward man, but with the inward, which is the true self and concernment of man. For the just man does not permit the several elements within him to interfere with one another, or any of them to do the work of others. He sets in order his own inner life, and his own master and his own laws, and at the peace with them. And when he has bound together the three principles within him, which may be compared to the higher, lower, and middle notes of the scale, the intermediate intervals, which he had bound all these together, it is no longer many, but he has become one entirely temperate and perfectly adjusted nature, that he proceeds to act, if he has to act, whether in the master of property, or in the treatment of the body, or some affair of politics or private business, always thinking and calling of which preserves and cooperates with his harmonious conditions, just and good action, and the knowledge which presides over it, wisdom, and that without time, impairs his condition. He will call unjust action and an opinion which presides over its ignorance. You have said the exact truth, Socrates. Very good. If we were to affirm that he has discovered that the man in just state, the nature of justice in each of them, we should not be telling falsehood. Most certainly not. May we say so, then? Let us say so. And now, I said, injustice has to be considered. Clearly. Must not injustice be the strife which arises among three principles, in meddlesomeness, and in interference, in risingness of a part of soul against the whole, assertion of unlawful authority, which is made by rebellious subjects against the true prince, of whom the natural vassal, which is all the confusion and delusion but injustice, and intemperance and cowardice and ignorance, every form of vice. Exactly so. And if the nature of justice and injustice to be known, then the meaning of acting unjustly and being unjust, or, again, of acting justly, will also be perfectly clear. What do you mean? He said. Why, I said, they are like diseases and healthy. Why, I said, they are like disease and health, being in the soul just what disease and health are to the body. How so? Why, I said, that which is healthy causes health, and that which is unhealthy causes disease. Yes, and just actions cause justice, and unjust actions cause injustice. That is certain. And the creation of health of the institution of natural order and governance of one by another is the part of the body. The creation of disease is the production of the state of things of variance with the natural order. True. And it's not the creation of justice and the institution of natural order, the governance of one another by the parts of the soul, and the creation of injustices by the induction of the state things at variance with the natural order. Exactly so, he said. Then virtue is the health and the beauty of well-being of the soul, the vice of the disease and weakness and deformity of the same. True. And do not good practices lead to virtue, and evil practices to vice? Assuredly. Still our old question, the comparative advantage of justice and injustice, has not been answered. Which is more profitable, to be just and act justly and practice virtue, whether seen or unseen goods of men, or be unjust or act unjustly, if only unpunished and unreformed? In my justice, Socrates, the question has now become ridiculous. We know that when the bodily constitution is gone, life is no longer endurable. Through pampered with all kinds of meats and drinks, and having all the wealth and power, shall be told that when the very essence of the vital principle is undermined and corrupted, life is still worth having it to a man, if only he is allowed to do whatever he likes, with the single exception that he does not acquire injustice or virtue, or to escape from injustice or vice, assuming that both of them such as we have described. Yes, I said, the question is, as you say, ridiculous. Still, as we are near the spot at which we may see the truth in the clearest matters with our own eyes, let us not faint by the way. Certainly not, he replied. Come hither, I said, and behold the various forms of vice, those of them, I mean, which are worth looking at. I am following you, he replied. Proceed. I said the argument seems to have reached a height from which, as some tower of speculation, a man may look down and see virtue is one, but that the forms of vice are innumerable. There are four special ones which are deserving of note. Which do you mean? He asked. I mean, I replied, that there appears to be many forms of the soul as there are distinct forms of the state. How many? There are 5 of the state and 5 of the soul, I said. What are they? The first, I said, which we have been describing and may have been seen to be 2 names, monarchy and aristocracy. According to rule, is exercised one distinguished man or by many. True, he replied. But I regard 2 names in describing one form only, for which the government is in the hands of one or many, as the governor has been trained in the manner in which he is supposed. The fundamental laws of the state will be maintained. That is true, he replied. End of Book 4.